Back with another episode of Semi-Pro. This time I'm joined by Frankie Ward, an interviewer and host for, I would say just by now, countless esports events, and most known for her time in CSGO. I actually wanted to start talking a little bit about Counter-Strike specifically. I figure we'll probably linger on that topic for the most part. That's what my channel is mostly about, and that's what you are, I would say, an expert in that respect in terms of those events. So I wanted to start by taking a temperature check on the scene overall. Obviously, in the online era so far, since the pandemic hit, everybody's been indoors, everything's been online. I wanted to ask you what your sort of take was on how the adaptation has come in, because we've not just seen event organizers, TOs themselves have to adapt, but also members of talent like yourself. We've seen players and fans, most notably as well, have to adapt to these circumstances and change their expectations. So do you think that everything's adapted well, or is there still more work to do in that sense for fully appreciating what we can offer during the online circumstances?
I think that it's good now. I think that when the pandemic first hit and everything, it was everyone putting on Counter-Strike all the time. And it was exhausting. And I think, to be honest, a bit repetitive. Not that the coverage wasn't good. I think that all the TOs did a fantastic job. And I think one of the great things that we saw last year was a bit more diversity in the different approaches, whether that was WePlay having their crazy studio, just throwing everything at it, just putting on a really different show, to Blast having a unique feel and really making the most of Launders and Scrawny just being fantastic. I mean, Connor jumped naked into freezing cold water in Copenhagen.
My heart goes out to him, yeah.
Oh my God, he bloody loved it. I'm sure he'll get his bum out again fast. And then obviously ESL with their trios and things like that. So I think it was really impressive at how the TOs diversified and we got to see different tones come out. And also we kind of started to see, because of people maybe moving on from Counter-Strike or deciding to do different things, or maybe going exclusive, not officially. We don't tend to do much exclusive officialness in esports, let alone just Counter-Strike. But we tended to see a talent kind of going with certain TOs. And I thought that was actually really a good thing, because then suddenly you have the tone of voice and you have ambassadors for those different strands and things. So I thought that was really cool. But there was too much, I think. There's teams facing each other in the same matchups every single week. And I think that the teams were fed up with that as well. And we were not seeing new things. And then we had the rise of almost the individuals in the risk-taking, the wide peaking, the angels, which are can be exciting to watch, but maybe lacking a bit of the depth that we see at LAN. So now I feel like the tournament schedule is a bit better. And with ESL Pro League, for example, we're about to go into the playoffs as we're recording this. And someone like Heroic, because they came top of their group. I know this is an EPL format in general. It's not like it's anything new, but because they came top of their group in Group A, they've actually had a few weeks, for example, and they've just got 2 new players. So they have 3 weeks to actually work with those players, diversify their playbook and all that kind of stuff. And even as we move forward into, say, IEMs again, the whole plan, whether we have players or not, is to have the group stage and then have a few days off to do media days and to have a bit of a breather and all that kind of stuff, and then get into the next tournament. So these tournaments are suddenly turning into these 2-week events where there's room to breathe and there's room to practice and grow for these teams. And also, to be honest, giving them 3 days at least between stages means that they do get that downtime, because the likelihood is they are going to go straight from that tournament into another tournament series as well. So I think we're starting to get better in terms of that not work-life balance, because they're constantly working anyway, but we're getting into that kind of tournament to practice balance a little bit better, at least more than we did last year, I think. And that's really, really key if we're going to see new things.
And that's the major factor as well. You talked about diversifying not just the playbook of the teams when they have the time, but also what the TOs themselves are trying in terms of their different approaches. And one of the things that a lot of TOs now in the online era in general, maybe unfairly to some extent, have been criticized for, is always putting on something similar to what they just had on last time, or maybe what their competitors just had. For example, obviously the Blast had all of their skits, like obviously, as you mentioned, Scrawny jumping into the pool. Obviously Flashpoint had their skits back at last year, and suddenly
ESL, so good.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah, and a lot
I just
of them,
like remembering Potter. So good. Sorry. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of those end up having that sort of pizzazz that you don't get out of
Yeah.
maybe an ESL broadcast. So they start pivoting and doing some of their own stuff. And okay, well, there's people who look at that cynically, and then there's people who just say, well, it's at least there's content, right? At least there's something here to sink my teeth into, so to speak. And I think maybe, yeah, you can point to whoever did the trend setting, but at the very least, the different approaches were tried. We got to see what worked in what ways, and now we're almost settling into a new system. One of the things that I noticed in the early days of the pandemic were the members of talent themselves felt very heavily worked in that sense, right? Where especially with the tricasts and stuff, you did see some very long days, almost perhaps a regression to some of the older days where members of talent were on duty for maybe 12 hours or upwards of that amount. So it kind of went back a little bit in the early stages of things. Do you think that now that obviously it's important for the players themselves, it's important for the fans so that they can all take a break and recenter ahead of some high profile playoff match, and the absence makes the heart grow fonder for the actual high level games? Do you think that the members of talent as well are sort of breathing easier, or did maybe some of them appreciate it? Like, what was your perspective when obviously ESL Pro League was going on last year, and a lot of these members of talent obviously did have a lot of action, a lot of screen time in that sense? Was it too much then as well?
I can't speak for them.
Sure.
And I think the healthy thing was, at least with those trios, is the way that it would work on an ESL event, going by Cologne, which I worked, and I did IEM at the end of the year as well, because
right.
I was meant to be doing interviews for that, but then Trace unfortunately got ill and had to quarantine. Thankfully, symptomless. But the way that it worked for that was we had 2 desk crews. So although the casters were also in the analyst desk as well, essentially they were doing similar hours to what they would normally do. It's just they were doing the analysis bits in between as well. But we were still quite pacey with those moments. So hopefully it wasn't too much for them. I think it was probably it's definitely something new for, say, Hugo and Harry, who are a brilliant casting duo, and suddenly they're on the desk and it's a very different environment. And then you've got a desk host who's kind of engineering that situation. So it's definitely a different thing, especially also when you've got Harry and Hugo are amazing. They're such a good trio with Stunner as well. They bounce off each other really well. So, but it was still quite different when I came in, because again, I'm a different host. So there's that adjustment period as well, let alone adjusting to being on a desk. But I think those two are enormously underrated, and I would work with them in a heartbeat on a desk. I think they're amazing. But yeah, so I think it was more that there were 6-day weeks constantly, as opposed to being on camera for the amount of hours a day they were. Because for me, it was a joy to do Cologne, where we'd do 2 best of 3s, and then the other guys would do a best of 3, or we'd do a single best of 3. And for me, when I do interviews on a show, I'm working like 12 to 14 hours a day.
Yes.
I don't get to switch myself off. There's no one else taking my spot. So I'm used to those long hours. So for me, it was lovely. I had a bit more balance than I normally do. And when I'm desk hosting, I'll spend a couple of hours prepping for each show anyway. So it was nice to have that extra time to do that.
One of the things that I noticed in some of the DreamHack events was actually they had the desk host come in for a little bit during freeze time in the middle of the actual game in some instances. Did you think that experiment worked out well as well, in order to change things up and make, one tournament have a bit of a different flair?
For DreamHack Masters Winter?
Yes.
Oh, someone on Twitter wrote for DreamHack, oh, Frankie's reading the fun facts. I mean, I was giving my opinion sometime, but sure. I'm very wary of overstepping, especially as a community. I did speak sometimes during Cologne as well, and it was like I had some really vile things sent to me over me having my voice in some casts and things, even though they were group stage. I didn't speak during the finals or the playoffs or anything like that. I was very conscious about that, because we changed the tone as we moved from groups to the more serious matches, and that's a normal thing. Even my dress, like the way I dress, changes as the event goes on. So with Masters, it was just really fun, because Launders and Scrawny, again, 2 fantastic casters, not normally on an analyst desk, and we got to do that event together and kind of experiment and things. And the boys really wanted me to speak and to sort of be part of things. So when I can, I think it's just trying to dive in with stats and all that kind of thing. Or when our ACS, who was fabulous doing the ticker and doing the fun facts on screen. I mean, very interesting facts, I should say, on screen. Sometimes it might be that I got an opinion on those. God, I sound so basic. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
It was just fun. I think it was just trying to work a way in there. But I came into that event being really scared because of like, you know, reading like kind of death threat style comments over Cologne. That was like a really hard event when I was getting those messages. But I went into Masters feeling a bit more like I could be myself because I wasn't covering for anyone. Like I was asked to do that desk. I wasn't in place of someone having to quarantine, for example. So I knew that I was there to do that job, and I knew I was there to work with Launton and Scorney. So I didn't have imposter syndrome. Whereas on Cologne, I was there at the last minute because unfortunately Trace couldn't do it. And with IEM Global Challenge, I was there unfortunately because Trace couldn't do it. And he's a good mate of mine. I think he's underrated in general in esports as a talent. I think ESL obviously really appreciates what he can do. Counter-Strike community really appreciates what he can do, but people outside of Counter-Strike maybe aren't familiar with his work, and I think they should be because I genuinely think he's one of the best that we have. So yeah, it was nice to kind of experiment. So I'd totally be up for doing that again. But I think my skill lies in kind of research, my relationship with the players, and sort of if I can bring in more stuff like from the discussions I've had with them for use on a broadcast and all that kind of stuff, like stuff that didn't make it to air in an interview that we recorded and little bits like that.
Do you think that maybe that's something that tournaments, as presumably when LANs actually resume, so you can be there in person, tournaments might even lean into a little bit more, like during halftime, you are able to maybe step in and record a quick interview with one of the players or the coaches or something to that effect? Because it feels like that's something we see in traditional sports a lot. It seems to be a way to get like the immediate, almost like the equivalent of looking at the pro player's Twitter, except obviously he's not tweeting in the middle of the game, but you get that hot take, you get that instant reaction to what the pulse is in the camp, like the Astralis camp or in the Team Liquid camp. So do you think that that's something that should be done in terms of working interviews, maybe not just in that specific example, but working more interviews in that sense? Or do you think maybe you've already got enough of a workload to keep track of? What do you think?
I like doing it between maps, but not so much at halftime. And when I do DreamHack Masters at LAN, they get me to do a piece to camera like at the end of the half, just something about the mood or the atmosphere in the LAN, and then I throw to the break. But I think that's something we still need to work on if we're going to do it, because the casters kind of throw to me. For me, when I'm on camera, I don't like feeling like I'm unnecessary, because then I don't feel like I have permission to say anything. I know that's something personal to me, and if I'm asked to do something, I should do it because it's my job. Like, it doesn't mean I can't have an opinion on it, but I love the DreamHack team. They out of all the tournament organizers use me, I guess, to my fullest in a way. They'll use my writing skills, they'll get me to do voiceovers, they'll get me to do interviews, they'll get me to stage host, sometimes desk host. I've thoroughly enjoy working with them. They were the first to give me my first kind of LAN hosting opportunity with PUBG back at DreamHack Austin in 2018. So I'm going with it, but I think if I get the chance to work with them again, I would love to do something like that, you know, the halftime talk. It's just working out what that's going to be, because for me to just go on camera and just be like, well, everyone's really quiet here, or blah, 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 blah. We can probably see that from the player cameras during the actual match. So I think it's a case of just trying to work out what that should be. So I'm not opposed to it, but I wouldn't probably talk to anyone in that match during the actual halftime itself, because those teams are not going to like it. And
sure, yeah.
I need them to enjoy talking to me.
Yes, of course, yeah. Maybe they can get the good cop, bad cop, the bad cop interviewer can come in and barge through and start asking some of those tough questions, like, how did you lose this half so badly or something, right? So.
Well, I do that during at the end of the map.
Sure,
I'll do that during the end of the map, but not during the halftime, because the most important thing is we've got to see the best Counter-Strike. And so it's a fine balance with what I do, which is, especially if I'm doing a pre-match interview, which is I don't want to say anything that is going to get in their head and impact their performance negatively, because that's not fair. Because normally I'm only interviewing one of the teams before the match rather than both. So it wouldn't be fair if I said something to one and then the other didn't get that psychological torture. Hopefully it's not torture talking to me. So yeah, once we're actually in. I feel like for competitive integrity, it's not fair for me to disturb the players, especially as during halftime they're going to be doing team talks. Again, if I'm talking to one team, not the other, it's an issue. With between maps, it's not so bad because they usually have 10 minutes at least, and I'm grabbing them for 1 minute, 2 minute tops. I'm very, very quick between maps because it's literally something about something that happened in that game. It's not about the bigger picture that we might cover at the end of the match, for example. So it's very, very quick in and out. And I'm very fortunate that, you know, most of the teams are game to do it, to be honest, because I understand why they wouldn't be.
Fair enough, yeah. One of the things that I was curious about your take on is now we've gotten pretty deep into the online section of Counter-Strike, right? When the LANs do return, which hopefully will be, in fact, this year, is there something we can take, like any lessons or something that you yourself have thought about that we as a community, or maybe specific roles in this community, like event organizers or members of talent or players or fans or anything like that, anything that these people who make up the broader community can actually take away from the online era? Anything that maybe, is it just as simple as something like, oh, you took it for granted that you have all these LANs? Is there something deeper that maybe we innovated in a way and that can actually be helpful when the LANs do return? Anything that gets your brain worrying in this respect?
Oh, in terms of the community, I'm not sure. I mean, hopefully there'll be people who started watching Counter-Strike who'll come to a live event, because I just think that esports is at its best, obviously, when you're viewing it with other people in an arena. For me, that's esports. Like, so it's very strange not having it. Obviously, the stuff that we're having right now is esports. I'm not saying it's not. I just mean that the pinnacle is, you know, being in the Spodek arena and watching teams raise that trophy, or a team, sorry, I should say, raise that trophy. So yeah, I hope that people don't take it for granted when we can go back. I think one of the things that I've noticed more, and I think was always present, but I don't think I was as aware, which sounds horribly naive, and it is the amount of vitriol that players get online is absolutely shocking to me. And I think it has been worse since the pandemic, or maybe players are talking about it more because their mental health is affected by the fact that they can't go anywhere, and, you know, they're constantly competing. And I mentioned earlier the same matchups week in, week out, not having time to practice, not being in the same space as each other. Like Cloud9 didn't even get a boot camp together in that 5-month period. That's draining. That's mentally draining. And then on top of that, you've got fans, maybe some who lost money gambling on a match or something like that. I shouldn't even try and rationalize it, sending death threats to people or death threats to players' families. And I genuinely think it affects players in the server, because they know that if they lose, they're going to get a load of shit thrown their way. It's affected me, especially when I first started out, having people say things to me. It affected me in Cologne last year, where people were, you know, saying horrible things online about me, what they do to my dead body, and I had like a basically verge on a panic attack in my hotel room because it was just awful. And I don't get that much. I really don't get that much, but players get an unspeakable amount. And so what I'm really hoping is that we can have more conversations about this, and players can come forward, and orgs, actually. I think it's really important for orgs and for tournament organizers to speak up about this and try and clamp down on it, because I know there's the Any Key campaign, which is about being in game and being good to each other in game, but I don't think we talk enough about what players have to go through on a daily basis that they shouldn't. Like, I know it's a tough life, players tend to get paid well, blah blah blah, but there are certain things they shouldn't have to be going through, because no one should.
And this is an interesting topic to dive into because of the fact that a lot of the interactions end up being one-on-one social media accounts, where it is that anonymity that presumably is reinforcing it, where if it's the virtual water cooler on one of the subreddits or something, yeah, you can have some brash takes, but usually you don't have the same level of, we'll say, the toxic elements of people who do send these ridiculously vile messages to players, to members of talent. You don't get the same interactions privately as you do in the public, when you have to at least have some modicum of respect for your fellow human being, even if it is sort of attenuated by the fact that you're talking online anonymously. When you're doing this private messaging thing, I think maybe might be one of the reasons why traditional sports doesn't seem to suffer from this as much. Is they probably do get a bunch of messages, but I doubt anybody is checking through those, because it's on Twitter. Most of those players probably don't don't even have, like, I imagine most of the soccer and football players probably aren't running around with open DMs, for example. I imagine that a lot of esports personalities that don't have the open DMs on Twitter, that's probably a main reason why, and just reducing or increasing the barrier of entry there so that you filter out the super low effort ones that we're going to send it, but, oh, I can't send it through Twitter, so I guess I won't sign up for whatever other account I need to do it. I won't fire off an email or whatever, or if it does, maybe it just gets caught by the spam filters, whatever the case may be. It's a bit easier, a bit more healthy for the public figures to filter it out in that sense. So do you think maybe the result of this is, you kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater in this scenario, but should maybe all members of talent and all professional players, at least when they get to a point where it is starting to come in pretty regularly, should they just close their open DMs? Should they close those open lines of communication? Because an advantage of esports that a lot of people tout is that because of the fact perhaps that it's not quite as established as traditional sports, you actually do have a level of interaction with the members of talent and the members of the broadcast and the professional players. If that goes away because maybe it's just not something that is feasible to exist, then it would be a loss, but maybe it's worth it. What do you think of the whole scenario in that sense?
I think it's up to the individual, but I don't have open DMs. My Instagram DMs are filtered. Discord, you can only privately message me if I am friends with you on Discord, and my email is available for people to contact me if they want to. It's quite funny how many people try and make business propositions over social media.
Yes.
Like on Instagram, sometimes I see in my filtered DMs someone trying to propose something to me, and it's like, just if you're genuinely serious, use an email, because I don't want to discuss business stuff with you over Instagram.
Sure.
So yeah, I think it's been really good for me. Again, I don't see it on HRTV. I've got my sports mode on, thanks Chad, and all that kind of stuff. So I don't have to see it. I only see it when people tweet me screen grabs and all that kind of stuff. So I'm pretty, I guess, not safe is the right word, but
somewhat insulated, you would say?
It's yeah. I mean, the weird thing during ESL Pro League and I Am Katowice this year was watching on Twitch because I didn't have the feed that I would usually have when I'm in the studio.
Okay.
So I can see Twitch chat a lot more. But to be honest, the stuff on Twitch chat, for me, it's harmless in the sense it does me no harm. It doesn't mean it should be there, but it's not something that keeps me awake at night or upsets me. It's, stuff like people writing sexual stuff about me, or sometimes writing that I ask the same questions, or like stuff about my ability to interview, or like that I'm a silver whatever, and I'm like, actually I'm a GN3, but also I don't have a rank anymore, decade, because I'm too busy working. I don't have time to listen. Yes.
That's what I say when they ask, by the way. I just say I'm too busy, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not amazing at CS, but that's okay because I watch a lot of CS, right? And I work with brilliant people, and my job is to ask questions. So it's fine. I don't get too insulted by that, because also for every person who is a dick in Twitch chat, there's normally a few dozen good eggs who aren't saying anything about me or are saying nice things. So I am very grateful. It's been actually quite nice watching Twitch chat. And when someone says my smile is fake, then I've got a comeback for that. I can have a little bit of fun. I haven't got in trouble so far. So hopefully I won't get reprimanded for being a little bit cheeky in Twitch chat, but like I have fun with it. So it's fine. But yeah, obviously I would definitely encourage players who are experiencing harassment to take those measures to protect themselves. But at the same time, it doesn't solve the issue of people being awful people. And I say people being awful, like people acting awfully. I don't think most people aren't truly awful. They're just lonely, or they're scared that they're not amounting to something, so they're taking it out on other people, when actually they can amount to something. And maybe they've lost some money gambling and they're angry and they want to take it out on someone, and their favorite pro player is someone they watch on Twitch, or they watch in matches, and they have that parasocial relationship, and so they take it out on that person as well as respecting and admiring that person. I think that's just what happens, right?
Sure.
Sounded like Stan now.
To some extent, there is that element of it. We could say it's a gradient or it's a spectrum, and depending on where you fall on that, you may be more or less helpful, in that sense. So.
Exactly. Oh my God. Sorry, I keep, just in case people are watching this wondering what she's doing, I need to get my hair cut. So that is why I keep fiddling with my fringe. I had to say it at some point. I'm sorry. Yeah. Right. Okay. Right. The fringe disclaimer has come out. It's fine.
So speaking of things that maybe have to be said, right? I've got one that I'm a bit of two minds to even ask the question in the first place, but I'll pose the topic anyway, and I can see what you think. Because to one extent, right, I want to ask questions where I'm asking the interviewer subject, right, what they know and about things that they are an expert in. But in the other sense, I do tend to try to keep things relevant to the work, to the element in that sense. However, in this specific case, we've touched on the harassment, we've touched on the anonymous messages and the nature of parasocial relationships and stuff. And I feel like it's an appropriate time to broach this particular subject in that sense. And maybe you can talk to me about where this rings true or whether you disagree. There's a pretty big movement, perhaps. Maybe it's a little bit less noticeable now than it was maybe a couple of years ago. But when the discussion of females in esports, females in gaming, having maybe disproportionate amounts of harassment or certainly different kinds of harassment levied at them, a lot of people were maybe doubtful or skeptical of the claims, and they said that, well, any man will get the same kind of harassment or different kinds, but same amount, same quantities, and they try to sort of measure it in a different capacity, right? So my question to you now is, I'll pose the subject as, obviously, if I'm in Twitch chat, or if anybody of a similar repute to you or to another member of talent who is on these tier 1 broadcasts, if they pop into Twitch chat and they say, "What's up, Twitch chatters?" You're not going to get a lot of comments about, at least not a lot of presumably honest comments about the sexuality or the sex appeal of that particular person, right? Somebody might be like, "Oh, Sponge, you sexy beast," but they're not going to really start to go into detail. They're not going to try to like it has an underlying connotation that's very different when it's you or when it's another female member of talent coming in and saying, "What's up, Twitch chatters?" and then the response is some variant of the Craigasm emote or whatever the case may be, right? So I did see that you had a tweet about something like this, where maybe it was just a moment where you were kind of fed up with the fact that every time you go into Twitch chat, you get a number of people who are making those kinds of comments. Can you talk to us about what your thought process is when that stuff happens? Because it's harmless in the sense that you described it but it doesn't need to be there, and it also does maybe discolor the overall complexion of Twitch chat for however long it takes you to forget about that particular interaction. So what's your point of view on this in the terms of the different kinds of response, maybe not even negative harassment, but just response that a female member of talent will get compared to a male one?
So I think I tweeted during the EPL groups recently that I wanted to go to Twitch chat and not see like gross, creepy comments about myself. So it wasn't when I said hello to Twitch chat, it's when I'm on screen, and then there'll always be some comments. To be honest, most of the comments are like nice, actually. If I actually say hello to Twitch chat, I get some really nice comments. I get some, obviously, when my interviews are on where people are, claiming I should be doing my job or stuff like that occasionally. But to be honest, they're like few and far between now. So for me, my relationship with Twitch chat is a good one. So much better than when I first started doing my job. And I'm pretty relaxed about it, to be honest. I'm obviously relaxed enough at the point where I just like reply to people and take the mick out of what they've said or whatever.
Sure.
But I do think that like if someone's like talking about, God, this someone's gonna clip this and use it out of context. But if someone's talking about fucking me in the ass, right? That shouldn't be on Twitch chat. I don't think it's a family show. It's an esports thing. I think that needs to be looked at, and I think sometimes you see behavior in Twitch chat where it's self-moderating, which is really nice to see, where people are saying, that's not cool, like, let's not do that kind of thing. I mean, it's very easy for me to also reply to that person and go, oh, well, you're not going to. So, So it just is a shame that I still see that stuff. I don't like it when people say grill because, like, it just feels a bit, And you know what? People don't say that as much as they used to. It's a very 2017 thing. People aren't saying cringe as much anymore, so maybe that's a 2019 thing, hopefully. So it's, I don't know. The reason I think it's potentially harmful is because of women always being seen as not belonging in the space if we're always treated differently and all that kind of thing. So someone writing like Frankie in a love heart is a nice thing. Like I'm not protesting that, and I'm not protesting people not doing it either. It's okay. I won't have my ego bruised too much. It's a weird thing to think about because I am someone who interviews people. I am not a pop star. I am not a poster on people's walls. But I guess I'm on people's screens a fair bit. And so you could kind of think, well, when I was younger, I might have had like a footballer on my wall or someone on my wall, and because I like that person. So if people like say they like me in Twitch chat and stuff like that, then I don't think, I don't know. Oh God, I'm really bad at explaining this. I guess like what I'm trying to say is I am someone who is in some ways a public figure. I don't consider myself a celebrity, but I am on people's screens. So therefore, if people find me attractive because of the way I look or as a result of that, like that's not something I should be like protesting against or being angry about. Like that's the thing that's inappropriate is when people say the sexualized stuff to me and all that kind of stuff. That's when it's inappropriate. Again, people might not necessarily think of me in that way, and I'm not asking them to. I'm not expecting them to, but I can also understand that there could be some of that, because I think back to me being like a teenager and seeing people on TV that I thought was cute, right?
Sure, yeah.
That's me trying to explain it in a way that's not up my own arse.
No, I have laid a very thick minefield here, so I admire your ability to dance between them and not set any of them off so far. So
the thing that is annoying is being compared to my female peers. I'm not compared to men. So for example, when I do an ESL production, there'll normally be people, again, not so much anymore, because I think I wasn't doing as much at the end of last year. I was doing one pre-recorded day on each IEM. Like I did interviews for almost every ESL event that I wasn't already that I wasn't like desk hosting on, kind of thing. I did a day or two with the media team, like, so I was present in some way, but not constantly, type of thing. Sure. It was more like I had a media day, and it was very appreciated that ESL got me on board in some way. So I still continued my kind of continuity of being their interviewer, which was lovely. But when I came back with Katowice, I saw some comments, kind of, the usual, comparing me to Freya, who again is fabulous. But they don't compare me to male interviews, for example, or male desk hosts. It's always kind of pitting women against each other. Like when I first started, it was Frankie or Smix kind of thing.
Right.
Like me and Smix were both at Katowice because she was hosting and interviewing for StarCraft, and I was doing Counter-Strike. So we were literally at the same event, drinking at the same bar, sure, because she's incredible, but constantly being compared to each other. And I think that's something that is obviously frustrating. Like no one, when I started, compared my interviews to Stunner's interviews, even though I was kind of his were the shoes that I was filling. Like he'd been the interviewer for ESL before me. And I don't think I've ever seen any comments comparing our interviews. Again, I'm not looking for them, so they might exist, but I haven't seen that. And
yeah, the overwhelming signal noise, so to speak, is to compare you to other female members of talent.
Other women, yeah. And one of the things that I like is, like Freya, for example, does Flashpoint. She did ECS and all that kind of stuff. She does Blast now, which is a great fit. And I do ESL events.
Sure.
So there's no need to compare us because we're literally on different broadcasts. And I consider her a friend as well. So I think it's really nice that we can support each other and champion each other. And I think that it's a shame that people in the community are always like one versus the other. And I do think it is not necessarily to do with interviews entirely. I think it's also to do with attractiveness as well, that people are rating one over the other and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a shame that it still happens, but it doesn't happen as much as it used to. So it's cool.
So you've noted some progress then, at the very least, in terms of the things.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I still get my imposter syndrome. I still get panicked that I'm not going to get hired for things because I don't get contracts for things. I don't have any long-term agreements with anyone. I don't have any agreements with anyone. So, I still get like really panicky that I'm not going to do the next broadcast for someone all the time, especially obviously in lockdown. But yeah, it's definitely, I feel more like I'm considered part of the community than, obviously, than when I first started.
Sure. So this is actually a perfect segue into the next topic, because one of the things that I remember from way back in the day, and if it's kind of sad that it's way back in the day and still a problem now, but you did have some pretty widespread tweets about freelancers and tournament organizers, talent managers, please reach out to your freelancers that you want to hire and try to lock us down ahead of time, because then we have peace of mind. And obviously that still is a bit of an issue in 2021, maybe exacerbated in some part by the pandemic, but certainly didn't seem like it was getting massively better. Maybe you can clarify that if like in 2019 it was significantly better than a couple of years prior. But to me, it does feel like, just from an outside perspective, again, I've done very minimal commentary in talent work, so I don't have the same perspective that you or anybody else who's more established will. But from the outside perspective, it does feel like while contracts might be coming in a little bit more frequently, the terms are still very hazy. The frequency of event offerings seems pretty slim in terms of how frequently it is. And it's almost like, maybe this is an unintended consequence of the business practice, but it does feel like an afterthought in that sense from the members of talent perspective. Do you agree with this? Is this too harsh to one way or the other?
I think contracts are more commonplace than they were. It really depends on the TO and the event itself. I know that the pandemic has affected dates and things like that, because at the start of 2019, or at least sort of by February, I knew a lot of my calendar and it was glorious. And then
Nice.
the pandemic came and I just lost all my work like that. And it was pretty gutting, because I was hoping to have a year that was a bit more settled than 2019, where I was away from home for 7 months. I wanted to be able to pick and choose the work and have all my events, with ESL, like I wanted to have those events and then kind of pick and choose what I did around them, because for me, like that's my home during Counter-Strike with ESL. It still makes me really excited. So yeah, I was really looking forward to that, and maybe having a holiday as well booked in, because I haven't been on one for years now. So yeah, that was the hope. And then obviously the pandemic came along and it moved all of that side, and we're still in that place, I think. So I can't really blame anything but the pandemic for me not having so much security at the moment. But I have kind of an idea of like what I would be doing this year. It's just that the pandemic kind of affects that. So I can't really say too much, or mostly because I don't really know. But I think it's also a thing that I still feel, again, I keep mentioning the phrase of imposter syndrome, but I still sort of worry about, not being seen as good enough, or in like true Counter-Strike, or all that kind of stuff. So I still get that feeling of it could all just like disappear, and that's something. So to speak, yeah, exactly. And I always get panicked that I might not get to the next event and all that kind of stuff. So it is a bit scary, and it's very stressful. And so I'm really hoping once we get back to lands and things like that, that it will be a little bit more concrete. And as the world returns to normal, hopefully I can kind of find more normality, because it has, to be honest, it has been nice getting to be at home for longer. And I'm renovating a house and a garden right now. So it's been lovely to actually be present for that. It was really hard at first because of losing the work, and also being in one place. That was very weird for me after a year and a half of not doing that. So I almost had to like rewire my brain for a bit and stop kind of kicking and screaming against it. And now I'm in like a really much calmer place about it, which is lovely, especially with doing ESL Pro League and IEM Katowice, and being integrated more into the broadcast than I was last year has just been actually really nice, really, really lovely. I've really, really enjoyed it. So, when I start going back into the studio, I will be very grateful for that. But I'm not unhappy with what I'm doing right now.
And it sounds like, even though right now it might be a little bit more stressful in terms of scheduling events and knowing that you're for sure locked in for some things, it was getting better at some point in time just a few years ago, and hopefully it goes back in that angle. So in the vein of panic and all of those things, I did have to ask you another hot button question, which is, do you have an esports insurance plan in case things go kaput and the whole CS scene or a lot of the work ends up falling through or something like that, or maybe you just get a weird change of winds of change come through and you're like, oh, maybe I want to do something else. Is there another sort of career path that you maybe not necessarily have planned for but have thought about pursuing in terms of if and when esports work stops becoming as much of a focus?
No, not really, because I spent years as a producer, and when I was at Twitch, I potentially could have pursued hosting earlier than I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I only left because my job disappeared.
Right.
And so I then had meetings and then decided to like bite the bullet, and I had some savings and that kind of thing. So I decided to try it out. And so, to be honest, the way that I look at my career now is it's not really so much after what are we doing hosting to a point. It's more kind of where am I going to go next, and am I going to keep pursuing this game, or am I going to try do other things and all that kind of stuff. So it's quite important for me to be playing different things, and I do lots and lots of different games. And what I really enjoy about that is I get to work with different people, I get to work with different talent, different production teams, and that's great because I just learn what is especially good about each production.
Right.
And so the one thing I think I would like to do after hosting is executive producing. We don't really have them on esports broadcast, and I think that it's really important to start integrating them because we have product managers who are overseeing the tournament and the broadcast and all these things, and they are, I guess, the touch points for the sponsors and things like that. They are so incredibly important and integral. Then you have the producers who are obviously producing each show or each talent team for the show. And then you have the media team or the content team who are producing pieces that are going to go in the broadcast and things like that. And that it's a huge sprawling thing. And I think that there is space for an executive producer to come in and actually sometimes be the person who makes really, really key decisions about the tone of voice, unites all the producers, all the teams together, including the social team as well, marketing and all that kind of stuff, and is the point person for all of those things in terms of the broadcast itself, as opposed to being responsible for the tournament. So I think that can be handled by product managers and admins and things. Again, like all TOs are different. So to be honest, like I think that I need to know much more about the inner workings of a lot of structures, and that's something I really want to know. So TOs, feel free to tell me because I'm really keen to know. I love that stuff. But yeah, I kind of want that, and I think an executive producer can also watch all the shows where possible and work with talent, because I think that one of the things that it would be really great in esports, and I've said this on other podcasts in the past, is the talent development side of things. I think it's really disappointing for people when they are, of course it's disappointing, when they are not carried forward to the next show and things like that. And I'm not necessarily talking about myself here. I genuinely mean in general. And I think that often feedback isn't given during a show, and some talent don't like that. So fair enough. But I think it's really important, because if you are not given the chance to improve as you go and to be the thing that the show needs you to be or wants you to be, then you never got that opportunity to do it. The show missed out on being better, and you missed out on being you missed out on that future opportunity.
Yes.
And also the TO misses out on the opportunity for that person to go forth and be an ambassador for them, and to talk about how proud they were of the work that they did. And so I think that that's something that's needed. And I think that producers often don't have the time to do it because they're working constantly, right? There's no time. So having someone who can actually watch the broadcasts and be responsible for the overall tone of everything, broadcast-wise, social-wise, content-wise, means that that person can have those meetings and almost be a point of contact for talent in that sense. And I think that's really important. I think that's something I would like to do in future for sure. I don't know where or what I'd do it for, but it's definitely something that I've thought about.
And that kind of brings us to the topic of, well, you mentioned improving and sort of getting to the top of your craft in that sense, or going on the path that will take you there, right? So I wanted to ask about your style of interviewing and essentially how you've put that together, because obviously you've been at this for a number of years now. So I'm sure you've picked up some things. You obviously tried some things that maybe didn't work out as well, and say, okay, let me pivot away from that or towards this. And you've done a lot of games, as you mentioned earlier, and as I said at the beginning of the interview. So that also sets us up pretty nicely to discuss maybe the differences between interviewing a League of Legends player at LEC, or maybe interviewing a player from CS, obviously, or maybe hosting a Valorant desk or something to that effect. So let's talk a little bit about the Frankie style of interviewing and of hosting. We can go pretty much any way here. So obviously, nobody really works in a vacuum, especially in esports. There's tons of examples in the past. Was there essentially an pre-existing sort of notion of what you wanted to do when you sort of accepted your first couple of jobs and started slotting into this role? Did you already bring something that was almost something of a developed package, or was it more something that you took from maybe inspiration from other examples, maybe traditional sports or something completely unrelated?
I didn't watch sports interviews. I mean, I'd seen some like at Sky in the UK or BBC, where you'd have your reporter who starts on camera and then the camera pans to the guy on the step and repeat board, with the logos behind them and all that kind of stuff. And it's very short and sharp and things. I didn't go into esports as an interviewer. I got asked to do interviews for Star Series 6 in Kiev in autumn 2018. First time I'd done interviews for an esports event. And I think I think I've had a good kind of fearless attitude, and I researched not as well, actually. When I look at my notes for that and my notes now, it's like, oh wow, it's like night and day. But yeah, I think I must have done a good job there. But what I noticed during Katowice, especially as me and Carmack from ESL had a chat about it 2 days in, was I think I was so overwhelmed with the thought that this was the major and like proving that I should be there and all that kind of stuff, that I'd done my research and everything, mostly in a travel lodge while working on a mobile gaming event in Dortmund, Germany, glamorous. And I had learned about these 120 players, and some of them I already knew, and some of them legends who I'd never met but knew. And yeah, I went in and I did a lot of context on my questions and were prefacing, and like a couple of times I sort of second guessed stuff, or I wasn't so used to interviewing for a language barrier before. Yeah. And so it's a crash course the first couple of days. And then I had a meeting, well, not even a meeting. Karma asked to speak to me outside the green room and just said, I want it more like this. I want it dynamic. And I went, oh, okay. Went back to my hotel, watched the VODs, went, oh, holy fuck. Yeah, okay. So, and I'd always done VOD review, but I hadn't really for Katowice yet. And yeah, it just changed everything. I just became so much better about my job overnight. Again, this is an example I've given multiple times, but it's genuinely the most valuable feedback I was ever given. And then, yeah, that's what I did. And because my interview style has always been about listening and responding, I think it worked really well. It kind of formed there and then. And I think I've got better because my knowledge and my relationship with the players has got better. But I don't think my style has changed too much. I think, I was quite fearless at the major with some of the stuff. The way I asked some of the things I said, I got called a bitch because I asked Edward if Na'Vi wanted to stay together as a team and win the major. And he was like, we'll try our best. And I was like, well, no, tell me yes or no. Like, do you want to win this? Yes. Great. Thank you. I get on well with Edward. Like, Edward didn't mind, but the audience did. So I don't think I'm as strong as I was, because it's really important to have a good relationship with players. And I respect them very much. I'm not there to get the Reddit clip. I'm not there to make someone have a bad day or give someone a hard time. And as I've always said, it's more that if someone doesn't give me an answer, or doesn't give me a kind of a satisfactory answer, gives me a win's a win when they've played badly, that's when I will maybe push them a bit more and go, yeah, but that's not going to get you further. So let's talk about what you need to do next time. I will be a bit more pushy in that front. And I will ask slightly tougher questions in that sense, but it's not really about tough questions now for me. It's more about just introspective questions, and also just giving them as much time as possible. Like when Twist dropped that bombshell on us at IEM Global Challenge about leaving Liquid, there was a few things in my mind, which is obviously this is his moment and he wants to say. So I said very little in that interview, but the first thing that came to mind was, well, his girlfriend's in Europe. So I know that he wants to be a European player because of the way that they're very public about their relationship on social media. So I also felt like it wasn't crossing a line. So I didn't like make it all about his girlfriend, but it was like, I know that you want to be in Europe. And so he gave us that. And I could have kept that interview going longer and made more of it about, why he's leaving Liquid and all that kind of stuff. But for me, I didn't feel like it was the appropriate time. And Carmack Wisdom again, he once said to me, I think this is in Chicago, he was like, Frankie, I want you to think of the interview like a casino. Know when to cash out. I'm sorry, okay. Carmack. I'm so sorry. That was a terrible impression. I respect you very much. But like, I love the way that he gives feedback.
Sure, yeah.
And it really stayed with me. And so for me, that interview, and it was an exit interview, was like, give that player the floor to talk about what they want to talk about, get him to the key takeaway from that interview that people reported on was that he wants to be a European player. For me, that's the main thing of that story. It's not why he left Team Liquid. It's the fact that he's ours now. Sorry, I know. So yeah, I didn't want it to be a negative interview. And I also wasn't like, I don't know. So, and also the other thing about that interview is everyone reported on it. No one reported on it that I did I did it with the desk, but I essentially kind of took the reins and went into my sideline mode. Sorry to Harry and Hugo. I talked to them after. They didn't mind. It was fine. But like, I don't think no one thinks about the fact that I did that interview. Everyone thinks about what was said in the interview. And for me, that's the sign of a successful sideline interview, at least. I know it wasn't sideline. It was on the desk because the moment wasn't like about what I was asking. It was about what he said. And I think that was a really good thing. And like I had, there was a comment at the start of last year that I wrote about in a blog where someone had said that that my interviews were all about me and my personality and things like that. And for me, that was upsetting because I don't think that's the case. But what I do use is my personality to make players feel comfortable.
Sure. And
I think so. I adapt. I adapt depending on what the player is like, So my interview style when I'm interviewing, say, Cadian from Heroic is going to be very different when I'm interviewing Stanislaw from Evil Geniuses, because they're very different in their temperament. And so there is no point in me running up to Stanislaw and being like, whoa, kind of thing. But with Cadian, I've literally met his mum when we were in Shanghai when he was Skyping his mum. So my relationship with him is going to be slightly different because like I've literally met his mum. Okay, not in person, but on Skype. So it's a different, it doesn't mean that I respect Stanislaw any less, but the way into my interview with those guys is going to be slightly different. Not like wholly different. I'm not going to be unprofessional about it, and I'm not going to play favorites or anything like that. It's just more that like the questions that I ask or the way that I'm going to ask them it's going to probably be like slightly different, basically.
Well, this touches on maybe a little bit less of a hot button issue now, but it certainly was the topic of discussion a couple of years back, which was the question, how did this make you feel, or how do you feel about, right? And how some people
the foreign tweet, women want to know how men feel, men want to know what they think.
That is one way of restating it. Yeah, he's actually also made, I believe, a video at some point where he explains why he always goes for think and over feel, and how there's like a reasoning behind it that's maybe a little bit less incendiary than his Twitter takes. But the case may be that essentially some people will almost use the argument against the feel question, and they almost think of it as like, well, it's never a good point, never a good question to ask. One of the things that you said on the Minds of Media episode was that it was a nuanced point where you said sometimes you actually do need to know what the player is feeling and where their mentality is at. And that is the most useful thing for the fans to impart back to the, for the player himself to think about in that sense. That's actually a good line of inquiry to pull on in that sense. So do you think that this sort of approach where, I mean, you just talked about it briefly earlier, that some people will say it's just it's all about you and your personality, or that you get the reductive comments that kind of ignore this stuff. Do you almost think that it's like a necessary thing to imaginary line to cross in this sense, where you've got to ask some questions that some people are going to maybe roll their eyes at initially, but it still gives them the right content that they need? Like, is it essentially the case that your approach, I mean, it seems to get the really good content out of it, right? So you're doing a good job in that respect, but some people seem to take issue with the methodology, even though they may just not understand that that's one of the best ways to get the actual content. Is that sort of your take on that?
I mean, I'm not someone who actually asks how you feel that often.
No, of course not. Yeah, but there were some cases where it was asked, where you had used it, and it made sense.
Everyone has.
Yeah,
everyone has. So, for me, my interview technique is based around responding. So, I need to open with something, then I can respond. So, I'll open with quite an open thing often, because I need to get the nugget from that. Right? I'm mining for gold, and then I find the gold, and I'm polishing it up. That's a shit analogy. So yeah, that's why I'm not an analyst, for multiple reasons, including that one. So yeah, it's just about, I think, getting to a point where you're able to ask something else. But I think most of the time I've only got 2 minutes of my interviews, so I'm very pointed about the stuff that I start with. I have to, especially when I'm doing online interviews where it's not immediately post-match. So I have to very quickly kind of set the context for what the interview is going to be about, and then we can go from there. I might ask a few things, because that's the other luxury of online. Often we have a few more minutes, so I might have 4 or 5 minutes, and then we can take something out of the interview for social media, and then we can use a couple of minutes of it on the broadcast itself. And it's quite nice, because now I've started to think more about that as well, as we've been doing ESL Pro League, going, this is going to be quite a nice thing for the social team to use, for example. Like Jax, the other day I interviewed Jax from G2, and we were talking about him being benched initially from G2, and that wasn't necessarily going to add to the discussion that the desk were having, because that's the primary role of my job. It's to do interviews that the desk can then discuss and dissect. But it was a nice thing for social media, because it was about Jack's individual story as opposed to his story in ESL Pro League. So yeah, I think, I don't know. It sounds bad. I don't really have too much of an opinion on it, I don't think, in terms of the questions. I think how you ask a question is actually sometimes much more powerful or important than the question itself. So, for example, asking a single question is so much better than asking one question. Sometimes you do have to give players an example, for example, saying, did you feel like this way, or was it more about that?
Sure.
Sometimes that can be useful if you need to get to something quickly, or if a player is struggling, or maybe they don't speak great English. I often don't like giving them that option. I'd rather just ask the question and then let them give me an answer. Then if they struggle, then I can help them out and be like, well, was it a case of this or more this? But I'd rather not have to do that. I'd rather they did that themselves. If you ask 3 questions and you take quite a long time to ask the question as well, then you're wasting that 2 minutes of time that you have with the player. And also, especially if they don't speak English as their first language, you're asking them a lot of things. Like, which is the question that you want them to answer? It's really important for me to only be asking one thing. Now, I do sometimes, I've just literally recorded a podcast for something today, and I found that I was asking the question twice quite often. And I don't know if it was because at first they were quite quiet and their English wasn't amazing, but then as we warmed up into the podcast, it became a lot easier and things like that. So I guess maybe I started to do it less. So I could literally, as I was doing, I was like, this is a bad habit and I shouldn't be doing it. But yeah, if you are concise and quite clear in your questions, you're going to get somewhere that you can then delve into deeper. And I think that's something I try and do. I was talking to Jason Kaplan the other day, because he messaged me and said, good interview. Like, I noticed you were doing the thing that you were talking about last time we met, because he lives in Cologne. When I was out there last year, we went and had lunch and had a catch up, and I mentioned that I wanted to be more precise in my questioning again, because I felt like during online I'd become a bit more long-winded and stuff. And then like he noticed that I got back to doing that, which was very sweet of him to kind of say. So think, yeah, I feel a lot more at ease again, and I'm more at ease with the format that we're recording in now. It's been an adjustment because it is very different doing interviews online to how it is to on the sideline, where it is like it's a bit more relaxed online, and I can experiment a little bit more, and we're doing other pieces as well as just the sideline. So it's been quite nice. But the other thing is, usually I do a pre-match interview, I do a post-match interview. The hardest thing about online is, I had this when I did DreamHack Open Fall last year, the RMR event. The desk covers the post-match as they should, and they have a lot longer than I do, and they also tend to do the pre-match questions as well. They tend to ask about the next matchup that this team is going to face, this, that, and the other. So everything that I might cover tends to get covered. So the hardest part for me is finding the new thing that's relevant to the desk, that's going to be an interesting discussion. It's a new challenge that I found during online. And at first I was kind of very like, I'm not going to be able to do anything interesting because it's all being done. And now I'm a bit more relaxed about it. But, you know, sometimes it is a bit harder to be creative with questions and find the thing that's interesting. So hopefully kind of people aren't too judgy about that. But I kind of wanted to explain that because that is something that I don't really get to say to people, which is, oh, my job's actually kind of harder now.
Sure.
Even though I've got the space and the time, it's a bit harder in the sense that I've got to find the new thing that hasn't been discussed. And because we're in this online era and there still is more Counter-Strike, less than last year, but still a lot, things are getting covered. Storylines have been done and done and done and done and done. And so you're just trying to find that new thing you can talk about. So when Flamey decides to give up something about Electronic being IGL on certain maps, you're just like, strap yourself in, lads, we got it.
There you go, yeah. Well, that's you finding the gold, right?
Yeah, it's finding the gold. And we having that space for a player to actually just suddenly talk about something they want to talk about, it's very helpful. It's actually very nice. And honestly, to be honest, I'm so pleased to see all of them. Like when they pop up on my VMix link, and some of the players like I hadn't interviewed for like a year by the time Katowice came round, I don't think. And so it was just like, oh my God, hey! I'm very enthusiastic.
No,
I don't think
that's what you're known for.
I don't think that's a surprise to anyone.
Yeah. There you go.
Very enthusiastic. I'm serious about Counter-Strike, but I'm just very jolly too, for the most part.
For the most part, there you go. So we are closing in on the time limit here, but I will ask you one parting question, which is, one of the things I've noticed, especially for members of Talon who work a lot of the time, and as you mentioned earlier, you had to adjust to even staying in the same house for a long period of time, right? Because you're used to being out all the time. So that was an initial challenge. Do you find it still a bit of an issue to like turn off or turn down some of what you do on broadcast when you are sort of walking around, especially now that the lines are blurred where you are working from home in that sense to some extent? Do you find that the persona or the character, if you to whatever extent it is separate from your everyday normal existence, do you find that is informing your day-to-day routine as well, when it is a little bit more mundane, when it is just you living as a human being? Is that something that you have struggled with in the past, or is that something that's come naturally? I'm
very much myself, like when I'm on camera
all the time
and off camera. Yeah, very much. I mean, I'm more direct when I'm doing interviews when I need to be. But I would say that I'm myself, which is funny because I have energy. So like when people say I have a fake smile and all that kind of stuff, like it's not true. It's more that when I'm in green rooms and things like that, I almost like try and put a lid on my energy and things like that, because I don't want to piss anyone off that I'm working with. But like I generally have energy and things like that. If I don't, it's because I'm feeling anxious about something, which is a natural thing that's been happening in this situation. And I think it is something I felt more since doing this job. But yeah, I think it was much harder actually in a way when I was coming back from LAN events, because I would come back from LAN events and sometimes have a day or two where I needed to adjust, partly because maybe I'd been like in bloody Brazil. It's a weird thing to say casually, but yeah, I could have been on the other side of the world, or a massive ocean. And so I come back and then, you know, you've been in this arena and you've had this big event and things like that. And it's like, and now I don't know how to function for a couple of days. Yes. You sit still suddenly, and then you like feel like you've been in that kind of car crash situation. You almost have like a physical breakdown. Your body is like, right, you need to stop for a couple of days. And I know that I'm not exclusive to this. I've seen other people talking about this as well. So now I don't have that in the same way, and I'm cool about it. It's good. I mean, I like it. I miss being with people. I miss being in the same space. It's hard for me working from home while a lot of the team for ESL, for example, are in the studio. Obviously, Harry and Hugo are with each other, so which is really nice. They're in the same. I think they're in Harry's house, so they're bubbled up together and they can do the cast together, and that's really important for them as a unit to be casting, and it's lovely. So I'm kind of on my own little island in a way, and I struggle a bit with that, but at the same time, when I finish on the show, I just I go downstairs. Like, if I don't have work the next day, maybe have a cheeky glass of wine. It's lovely. Watch something with my fiance. I take on my off days, because I don't work every single day of EPL. Sometimes I'll have the game on my phone or whatever. I have this weird folding phone thing, so it's like a tablet. I just take it everywhere with me. Do some gardening while I'm watching ESL Pro League. Maybe I've got my notebook with me and I'm just making notes and things. Sometimes I catch up with the matches afterwards, because I literally can't always be watching for 10 hours a day. So I do my best to obviously always be on, but I've been trying to find that balance a bit more. I mean, I've been painting a wardrobe intermittently during today between work commitments. It's been great.
You're finding ways, finding outlets to still make use of your time in that sense, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, it's great. I got given an Xbox at the end of last year, and that's been lovely. I've been able to associate PC with working, so it's been quite nice to. I know people turn their nose up at console and stuff, but I've been playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla. It's repetitive as hell, and I absolutely love it.
There you go. An escape gaming in its purest form, right? The escape.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I just really enjoy poleaxing people, cutting their heads off. I mean, it's not me. The program, the game chooses to cut people's heads off and just give me a nice little surprise. So I'm enjoying it. It's great.
There you
go. Relaxing.
The relaxing of cutting people's heads off. We've got it all here in this interview.
Oh
what I will say is, I'll give you the floor. You can make any final shout outs or let people know where they can find you on the internet and so on. I know you've got a pin tweet that does that very well as well, but anything else you wanted to say before we cut the feed?
Oh, I mean, I feel like people know everything they want to know about me probably. But I mean, I appreciate it when people get in touch, and I hope people are enjoying the work we're doing on ESL Pro League. It's always an adjustment, and I think we're making progress in the way that we tell stories, and that's only going to get bigger and better as well. So I really appreciate when people are watching and enjoying those matches and sending support, because it does genuinely mean a lot. I am currently renovating my house. My Instagram stories, my Instagram is Get Frank Games, and mostly the grid is pictures of my face, because pictures of the renovation don't seem to do well on the grid. But in the stories, that's where the fun wardrobe painting stuff and smashing up concrete and all that kind of stuff, that's where the magic happens. I twitch.tv/Frankie. I'm learning to play Dota on Tuesdays with Purge, who's a Dota analyst, which was fun until we started playing against real people, and then it turned into an absolute hellfire shit show. And I also, talking of shit shows, sometimes play Counter-Strike, sometimes I do viewer games, and also do matchmaking. I haven't done a matchmaking in a really long time, so my rank has gone. But at some point I'll try and play more and get better. Like Brolin, my career died with the SG meta. No, Brolin's amazing. Brolin is incredible. That was a joke. I haven't peaked since Beijing, put it like that. But it's been good. That was really genuinely a joke about Brolin. He's one of my favorites. He's very, very, very good with a rifle and a CZ. He's very, very good with a CZ. I'm going to stop digging myself into a hole. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We'll put the gravestone on top. Don't worry.
Oh, God.